Hi, I'm Niamh.
I'm Jen, and we're Biz Buddies.
So today, and Jen, we finally got through it without laughing at the end. I think that's really
So professional.
I know. I was thinking, I was wondering, I was like, how many times will it take before we'll stop feeling silly? So today we are talking about fear, which obviously is like a really big topic. And I think that it's a little bit scary to talk about fear. It's a little bit like, it's a little vulnerable. One of the reasons I really wanted to talk about fear was because I have always found that I look up to people online and, who are, doing really big things. And I always have this sense that there's like something really special and magical and they have all their shit together and they're perfect. And I think that when you can see someone else's fears or just hear about how they experience fears in their day-to-day life and in their businesses, it actually really helps to see, oh, it's okay. We're all humans. We're all on the same kinds of journeys at different points. And I think fear is a real equalizer.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think everyone has something that they're afraid of. I think it changes throughout our lives. It shifts and morphs. As we tackle and overcome certain fears, they sprout up elsewhere. But like I know as a parent, my fears are way different than they were as a non-parent. Yeah, and in business, I definitely have a few. Niamh and I were talking about a few of mine just before we hit record. Like launching. Launching is something I watch Niamh do regularly and successfully. I watch other people do it. I've been affiliates for successful launches. And yet, for some reason, I just can't fathom doing my own. I feel this sense of impending failure and doom each time I think about doing it, which probably means I should do it at some point and just tackle it and get past that. But it's still there for me.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I think there's also different kinds of fears and different things that come up around them. Like something like that, it's like, yeah, is it better to push through the fear and to like do the thing, like, the feel the fear and do it anyway kind of rationale, or is the fear an indicator that it's like, it's not for you? And those are kind of questions that I tackle a lot. I mean, I think at this point, our podcast listeners probably know that I have some fears. Like that's part of the reason why I'm so slow to say yes to things. My instant reaction is no, mostly out of fear and anxiety and like that sense of impending doom. I get that sense of impending doom a lot. I have to say, particularly around business, and a lot of times it's completely irrational. It's like, if I do this, I'm gonna fail, and then everybody's gonna hate me, and then I'm gonna be homeless, and it's like it just like gets bigger and bigger in my head. To it's like I'm gonna die if this thing doesn't go the way I want it to go.
Yeah, I hear you. I think everyone has those moments too. I mean, I don't know if everyone admits to them, or I mean, maybe some people don't go down that rabbit hole of like, this thing comes up today. If it hadn't come up today, I would never have thought of it. But suddenly I've like reduced myself to homelessness in my mind. Yes. Because of some opportunity that I'm afraid of for some reason. Yeah.
I think for me, like right now, I have a lot of fears around this podcast. So funny enough, as we're recording this, we haven't yet launched the podcast. It's launching next week. So we are behind you guys in time, which, because we wanted to make sure that we had a few episodes ready to go before we launch, because we know that, life can happen. And so I was all good with it. I was having fun, totally enjoying it. And then the other day, I was like, oh, Jen, I really haven't emailed my list in a while. And Jen goes, oh, well, don't worry. Very soon you're going to have the podcast to email them every week. And I was like, what? And all of a sudden,
I have to talk to my list every week?
Yeah, it's not just that. It's like actual people that I actually know are going to listen to this. And all of a sudden, I was like, oh, no.
Well, that was the point, right? I mean... Talking to each other, yes, but then sharing it. That's why we're, recording and doing the podcast.
I think I have a lot of defense mechanisms for fear. Like, with the podcast, I really like to go into the sense of like, I'm just talking to Jen and I'm trying to also make it helpful and succinct. Like Jen and I wouldn't always like go, okay, now let's come to a conclusion, and let's figure out what are we really saying here, So I find that I have this sort of like nebulous idea of audience, but then when I think of emailing my list, I think of individuals on my list and I go, oh my gosh, they might listen to it. And like at some point in time, several of my aunts have signed up for my list and I'm like, is Auntie Pat going to listen to my podcast? Like, oh my God.
Hi, Auntie Pat. Just in case you're listening.
If you are listening, God, stop listening, please.
I think in one of our recent episodes, I said hi to my mom because we were talking about when giving people too much content and how sometimes my mom will send me like 4 or 5 articles in a day, which often they are, they're curated by my mom. So they're things that she knows I care about, but I don't always have time right at that moment to read them. So I was like, hey, Mom. Yeah, because I know my mom's on my list. And my mom, I do often think as I'm making things to send out to my list, like, oh, yeah, Mom's going to read this.
Yeah.
I mean, I have more people on my list than just my mom. I'm going to qualify that. But my mom is one of the people who signed up for my list.
Well, hi, Jen's mom. Yeah, I think for me, a lot of my fears are around, in fact, 90% of my fears in my business are around what are other people going to think, which I don't think it's a helpful fear. I don't know where that fear comes from, or I don't know that it serves me in any way, unless I'm like, maybe it's helping me to edit and curate and make better stuff. But I don't think so. I think most of the time it's just really irrational.
I think it comes from being part of a society, though. My youngest daughter this week has been struggling with a friendship issue at school. It's her first sort of experience with bullying with another girl, and it's been really hard for her. And it's been interesting talking to her about what she wants in the situation. And she's one of those people who really thinks about everyone else's feelings first. And I think for some of us, it just comes in at a really young age, like thinking what everyone else will think about what you're doing or what you're saying. I definitely think some people have it more than others. Some people worry more about what other people think than others. I don't know that Tallulah, my oldest, worries about it at all. I don't think she's usually even aware that anyone's observing her a lot of the time. So it's interesting to see within 2 kids within the same family, like very, very different points of view on that potentially. But again, Tallulah has some communication difficulties, so it's hard to know exactly what she's thinking too. She may think about that, and I may just not know. But yeah, I think that comes in at a very young age, and I think American middle school, high school experiences ingrains it in us. We learn that people are watching us and judging us, often not that kindly, in my experience. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that's. I do think that's the case. I think that as we grow up, it's like we take on these funny idiosyncrasies. I think that I'm sure this sort of fear of what other people think has a really good evolutionary basis of like, not getting kicked out of the tribe and not dying, right? So for me, I think all fears do lead back to this whole, like, I don't want to die. So I don't want people to reject me. So they kick me out of the cave and I have to fend for myself, and so I think that a lot of that comes from it. And then, yeah, there's a lot of this sense in society of like, well, what is everyone else doing? And there's this weird thing as well right now where there's both this cultural tendency, I think, to be storytelling, to be telling our own stories as they're happening, as they're unfolding, and to be quite visible, on these social platforms. And it's all about getting I mean, even outside of the online marketing space, there's, being seen is a big thing. And then I think the flip side of that is like, oh my God, they're all going to discover what I'm really like, or I have to portray this one kind of person. And so I think a lot of the fears of what people think come around, well, it does feel like society is sort of ranking people based on followers and based on what they're doing and how they're performing. And then, I mean, my God, in business, like that, your numbers, or what people are how people are responding to, it feels like because business is so personal, like the kinds of business that we do, it's so personal. It's created from us. We're not creating an external product. We're creating our own things from ourselves where we're very much featured in it. And so then it feels like you're putting yourself out there to be judged and have people decide yes or no and give you money or not give you money. And it's like, I think it's a very vulnerable space to be in.
It's like a massive popularity contest.
Kind of
like homecoming queen times 1,000. No, sort of. But you know what that makes me think of too? As you were saying that, I was thinking about what it's like for kids growing up now. And I've thought about this a lot, like how grateful I am I did not have a device that could record my teenage angsty thoughts and fashion choices and hairstyles and every little thing I might have thought were broadcasting to the world back then. Now, a lot of all kids have these records, semi-permanent records, really, of teenage ridiculousness. Do you know what I mean? Like, there are things that kids are doing. I mean, and some of them are getting caught doing horrible, horrible things. You know, there have been a few times where someone's recorded some kind of abuse or assault or something on a phone, and it's ended up being evidence against them, in which case it was good that was caught. But just like, just thinking about, you know, he said, she said back in middle school and high school, like now everyone's texting and they can screenshot and prove that you said something mean about somebody else. Like there's this way of there being this trail of everything you're doing. And I mean, for us as adults, it's one thing. We're very kind of, well, somewhat more knowingly entering into it. Some people get caught off guard when a employer searches their Facebook and realizes when they called in sick, they were actually at the beach or, you know, things like that. But for kids, I'm not sure that they understand the full ramifications of being as visible as we are right now.
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
Fearful for them.
But then they might all sort of be in it together, where by the time they're our age, that's normal. And having this history built online feels normal and feels like, oh yeah, those weird teenage years, you know?
We had our hair sprayed like this, like a hand coming out of our forehead.
I am also eternally grateful that I was not online as a teenager, because I think that would have been interesting. But I noticed that I do tend to be very careful about what I'm putting into words, like what I'm actually typing out. But what I'm not careful about is what I'm saying. Like I like to just turn on my video camera. I mean, a lot of what I do is video, so I like to feel comfortable. So I like to I always imagine friends behind the camera, and like so with this podcast, I just have always just imagined, oh, I'm just talking to Jen in a slightly more structured way, and so then sometimes that rug suddenly gets pulled out from under you, and you go, oh my gosh, that safety mechanism that allowed me to feel comfortable talking is suddenly gone, and to get, you know, just pretty serious for a moment, I have to say one of the big fears that I have around this podcast is I sometimes really wonder if in the world we're in right now, do we need more content from white women who have come from some amount of middle class sort of more privileged experiences? And I wonder about like the value of our voices versus, you know, women of color and people in other minority groups, and whether or not, so I have a lot of angst around that, around like, what's the value of my voice, and is sharing my voice contributing to a culture that privileges me a lot? I really worry about that.
Well, I think that is something to think about and to talk about. My view on the privilege that we all get is that there is a sort of, for ages now, there's been the ruling class, let's call it ruling class, of white, straight, wealthy men in America, in the UK, in Europe, mostly. And that every step away from that, the privilege is removed a bit. So just being female, to start with, I mean, we only got to vote less than 100 years ago in America. We were able to own property. You know, we could have our own credit card in our own name in 1975. You know, so it's not that recent that we could really wield wealth, that we could own property, that we could have businesses, that we could divorce and still have a life after divorce, or be widowed and still have, you know, our own wherewithal. So there's that. I mean, I think just being female is being part of a minority group for one thing. But then, yes, if you are gay, if you are lesbian, if you're transgender for sure, if you're a person of color, like, and if you're multiple things, or if you're disabled in any of those groups, it's further and further away. And not to say that single, white, wealthy men have nothing to contribute to the world either. They definitely do. But I think voices from all of these sectors and all of these combinations of traits need to be heard. I do think we need to hear more from groups that have had their voices quieted longer, that have been silenced longer. But I don't think that means that our stories about our families and our businesses and our struggles will not be inspirational to someone, that someone won't find this helpful and useful. And we are both white, it is true, but I don't know. I've been in America long enough. My grandmother she was a DAR, daughter of American Revolution, which to me means we have African-American blood in our family. I mean, slave owners habitually raped their female slaves. There's someone in our family, I'm sure, with African-American blood, either directly behind me or next to me somewhere. We are mutts. I don't think that this idea of white appearance I don't think it means that much. I think we are going towards a tan, brownish society someday, I hope. And actually, I was really excited a few years ago when I saw this article that said America is officially a majority minority country now. If you combine all the non-whites, the numbers of babies that were born non-white outnumbered the white babies. So if you combine, all of the minorities in America, and if you put women into that too, because we do not have a president, we do have a Supreme Court, we have a couple women in the Supreme Court, but it came, was it either 30 or 40 years after the first African-American man. So I feel like, not to like line everybody up in a hierarchy, but white men have rights first. Black men in America got rights next. They became citizens before women who could vote. Then women, and then women of color. And there is this hierarchy of affluence, of opportunity, and of ability, and to climb ladders and do all these things that's there. And I don't think removing white women from that helps that much. I think we need to support women of color and support LGBT and support disabled people in getting their voices out more, but I think us silencing ourselves doesn't help to me. What do you think?
Yeah, I understand. And I think part of it too, and this is another sort of fear thing, is I do feel the sense of not knowing, like not feeling like it's okay how things are right now. Because it's like, I mean, I'm sure it's totally true that a lot of people have mixed bloodlines, but I think what matters right now is the perception, because that's the thing that's giving you the privilege or not giving you the privilege. And so then it's like, I don't want to contribute in any way, shape, or form to like this way of society being, but then society is like this right now. So it's like, what can I do, and how do I fit, and where is my voice valuable? And I think those are the kinds of questions that come up for me a lot. And actually, it's really helpful to talk about it, because even just talking about it, maybe someone out there in the audience is thinking about it and thinking about, well, how things are, and looking at like, how can we as individuals, I don't know. I just don't know how as an individual I can say, I don't like it and I want to help change it. I don't really know what that looks like.
Well, I think whenever we encounter it in our lives, we do have the decision of how we react to it, how we can help. And not to like totally glorify entrepreneurship and people working outside of traditional employment, but I do feel like this is one place where there aren't bosses who can racially discriminate against you. Sure, you have to prove yourself to your marketplace in one way or another, and there can still be barriers there. But when you create something, especially if it is an actual product of some kind, hopefully it stands on its own merits, whether you are male, female, person of color, person of different ability. It would be nice to think that this entrepreneurial world has a few of less glass ceilings. I don't know that it actually does. VC funding is still very, very focused on white men. Sure. It is very hard for any women, and especially women of color, to get any kind of venture capital funding with the structure we have here in the United States. I don't know what it's like in the UK, but yeah, it's super skewed. It's kind of like, it reminds me of like the Ivy League numbers. Like, sure, there are a few African-American people who get through Shark Tank, who like get to some VC capital. That's really hard. But the bootstrapping level that you and I are at, I mean, we would never go for venture capital anyways, because we're very like personality brand based, which is hard to sell off in the way that, you know, IPOs or
you're baked into the product then. Yeah.
right. It's not a business you can sell off for a big profit or anything. But but yeah, but I think the discussion is an important part of it. I think white women entering this discussion right now, that's been a huge problem with the feminist movement in the United States. Is for so long it was very like the suffrage movement was so white woman focused without much consideration for women of color. And I think that's changing. I believe it's changing. People are trying to change it. It needs to change. I mean, if you can't be a feminist without looking at women of color and transgender, because everything that affects white women affects them more, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing where, and I've always actually had those kinds of fears. It's like, well, what is my suffering, right, compared to someone else? Or what is my story compared to someone else's way worse story? You know, and then I feel like, you know, sort of who am I to talk? And I think that comes back to this question of visibility. And I think most fears in business, at least for me, and I think probably for a lot of our audience and a lot of the people in our field, you know, women, solo entrepreneurs, you know, creating these brand, you know, self-made kind of that kind of stuff. I think that for a lot of us, it does come down to this visibility, and it's because you're putting yourself out there and you're putting your work out there. And, you know, Jen, I know I've told you this before, but I have this thing that happens every time I launch something, and I'm really scared. Usually I'm really scared that nobody's going to buy. I'm like, okay. And I say this to you every time. Oh, I was saying it yesterday, wasn't I? Like we were having our own chat yesterday. I was like, Jen, what if this upcoming challenge is the one where nobody decides to join and it's all going to fall apart? And she was like, man, you say this every time. And so coming into
and every time it's been okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, so history has showed, like, unless something's drastically different, probably it will be okay, right?
Yeah. And so it's so funny because like going into a launch, I always have this fear that they're not going to show up, they're not going to care, they're not going to stick with me, they're not going to like it, and they're not going to buy. And then at the end of a launch, if it's been successful, you know, most of them have been successful. I've had the odd launch where it's like, just okay. But if it's been successful, the more successful the launch has been, like the more people who have bought and the more money I make, the more I freak out the day after. And I have days where like, I remember, and I have these like weird neurotic things that happen to me where like I was driving. I remember the day after I'd wrapped a launch and I had made this like amount of money that I'd never made before. And I was driving my kids to school, and all of a sudden I started saying out loud, what have I done? What have I done? Oh my God, what have I done? It's just like this panicky moment of like, all these people have put their faith in me, and what if I can't deliver for them what they wanted when they said yes, you know? And so I always get those two sides of the coin anytime I produce anything or launch anything. It's first is like, they're going to ignore me. And then when they don't ignore me, it's like, oh God, they didn't ignore me. And it's just.
Now I have to do something. Oh no. But you know what, Niamh? That is part of what I personally love about you so much. And what I think the people who stick with you love too, is there are a lot of people who once they get your money, they couldn't care less whether you're happy or not. Yeah, there are a lot of people who launch things and are just like, all right, you know, on to the next thing. They aren't worried about either being well, I'm sure everyone worries about people not showing up and being disappointed, but the other side of it, you worry then about disappointing the people who have said yes. But the thing is, with your kind of the connection marketing that you do, they get to know you. I mean, especially like the 30-day challenges that is coming up here in September. I'm trying to figure out when this show is going to air.
It's probably
already be in it, but it's probably happening right now while you're listening to this. They get 30 days. They see you on video for 30 days and they get to know you, and they know you well enough that they aren't going to be disappointed. That's my response to your fear, because I have watched it a few times. And the people who say yes to you usually are really happy with what they get. I mean, no one's going to make everyone happy all the time, but they know what they're getting into. It's not like you're tricking them. You haven't like done any bait and switch. You haven't promised something that you're not going to deliver, you know.
I know.
But I understand the fear still.
It's like, yeah, it is. It's totally irrational. It's so funny. I often only notice emotions when that's happening, when I'm suddenly catching myself saying something or singing. I was telling you the other day too, I have this thing that I don't realize that I'm stressed until I start singing that song from The Wizard of Oz, the If I Only Had a Brain song.
The scarecrows.
Singing it as I'm doing something, I go, oh no, here's the stress. I've gotten myself stressed and I didn't realize it.
Did you, were you really into musicals as a kid?
No, I did a lot of musical theater, and I don't even sing it, I just hum it. And I think it's my brain trying to just calm down, because I definitely have like a lot of stuff going on when I get stressed. And so then a song will kind of shut it down. So how do you know, like when you're afraid, how do you handle it, Jen?
Sometimes I disappear for a while. Sometimes I go into books I've tried to focus on something different, do a lot of writing or something. I know this past year, in the course of Stu and I leaving the family ranch that we ran for over 14 years, we ended up leaving it, which was, with starting online businesses and stuff, that was part of the plan. I eventually wanted to get to the point where we didn't need that income, where we could be location independent. But the way it ended up happening was not entirely ideal, and the financials didn't come out the way I originally hoped. And I had this period of feeling like, who the hell am I to talk to anyone about their money? What do I even know? I really had this feeling of being a fraud, which, when I first started talking to women about money, I did too, because even then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm no CFP, I'm no CPA, I don't have any credentials. And I've had times of really struggling myself, but with setting up the autism stuff for my daughter, the programs, and going through all the financial difficulties before the ACA outlawed some of the things that were going on with insurance back then, it was really complicated and difficult, and I'd done it, so I knew how to help some other women do it. That was kind of like how I started. And reading Ramit Sethi and meeting Amanda Steinberg, people who talked about finance all the time and did not have degrees either, kind of gave me the courage to be like, you know what, I don't know everything, but I know some things. I know what's worked for us. I could start talking about it. But at different times, I've really felt like in that arena of talking about finance, which, my other podcast is Financial Fluency. We talk about money all the time. I had some real times of just really withdrawing and being like, I used to do one-on-one coaching, and I really pulled back during that time because I felt like there's so many things we can't control, like especially with the agricultural business, the fact that it was a really down year when we ended up selling everything. We made a lot less than I thought we would. A lot of the negotiations didn't go the way I wanted. I did not have a full understanding of how much it costs to liquidate assets, how much taxes and fees we were going to pay. We ended up with so much less than I thought we would at the end of it, that it really shook my confidence. So yeah, I feel like my big fears are that I don't know what I'm talking about, and someone's going to find out and call me a big fat liar or a fake or a failure, or I have those fears. And so when that happens, I just kind of pull back a bit. I stopped offering one-on-one. I closed my membership group down for a while. I just didn't feel like I had the content to put out. I kept interviewing people because I feel like the interview shows is me wanting to know how other people do it. Like, how do you make your life and business work? Like, there's so many options and so many different ways people do it, and I want to learn from them too. But that was a very long-winded response.
I think it's fantastic, because what's so interesting is that I think a lot of our fears are coming out of this sense of expectations of others, and so it's the same kind of fear reflecting back. The same kind of fears that I'm having are the same kind of fears that you're having, and probably the same kind of fears a lot of people are having. And what I love about your fears is that, not to love it, not to say, oh, your fears are great. But I met you because I reached out and asked to do a one-on-one because I found dealing with money really hard. And it's like, I don't know how to organize this. I have I have debts and I have money coming in and I have bank accounts not set up very well. And I was like, I don't know.
International stuff too.
Yeah, and it was just confusing and I didn't know what to do. And like, I sat down with you and you got out a calculator and you were like mapping out accounts and how it could all flow. And, I've told you I haven't implemented absolutely everything that you have taught me, but a lot of it I've implemented. And like for the first time in my life, I have a savings account with some money in it, and it's like, oh, and that was never ever the case for me. And so just even some of those principles that you taught me that I didn't know, because I wasn't going to go and read all the books and I wasn't going to go and interview all the people or do all the learning. But being able to have one person say, hey, look, let's look at it and let's lay it out really, really helped. And so I think that when we are about a topic or when we're like delivering something, we feel like we have to be the everything to everyone, when really it's like, it's not actually about you. It's about the other people and how much you're able to help them move from where they are to where they want to go. And that you're really, really good at.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Actually, one other person I talked to recently who did one of those early sessions with me was saying something. So we'll see. I might open up some sessions if anyone wants them and try again. Because I really do like talking to people about it and just like the organizing side.
What I think as well is that, if anyone finds that idea appealing, like getting your money organized into some sort of fluid process that makes sense and that helps you to kind of retake some of the control, then I would recommend Jen's Mastering Money Matters course, which we could put as a link on here, because that's where I learned a lot of those principles. And then having you help me look at how it would apply to my situation just really took it over the top. So yeah, a one-on-one with the course is the way to go.
That is true. And now I have that course live finally, which that was something that, Niamh was in my membership group. We've both been in each other's groups. And so I created all the content in there. And then when I stopped it, I just sat on that content for, how long have I sat on that content for? I guess I stopped it last November and we're here in September of the following year. So almost a year that I've thought, oh, I should package that up into something. And again, it was like just some resistance, probably because of me feeling like the way I exited that business did not fill me with confidence in my own financial prowess, like having these feelings. But it was also the first time I ever sold a business and liquidized business assets and had to pay off business debts and, clear the table. And the truth is, even though it didn't go exactly how I wanted, I have that experience under my belt now, which is interesting to move forward. It's one more thing I can kind of add to, like, okay, I learned some things. I learned some things to watch out for. Like if someone else comes to me and tells me they're liquidating their business, I have some advice.
There you go.
Yeah. So, we'll put a link to that in case anyone wants it. That does kind of go through how to like structure and set up.
That stuff that I found really, really valuable. So I think that with fear, it's like, I feel like there's this blend of like figuring out, like you said at the start, fear of launching. So I think that there's like this question with any fear that comes up is like, is this fear here because it's like something that's really not me? Or is it just fear of something that's really exciting? And I do think that we can sort of unpick and examine our fears and just like question them. Well, like, what is it that I'm afraid of? And actually one thing that my dad taught me, which really, really helped, because a couple of years ago when I was first launching my first business, not my first business, but my first product that I had created myself online, I was so scared I could barely function. Like I was having trouble like getting up or doing anything because I was really, really scared. And my dad said, okay, why don't you just draw a giant circle? And he's like, and in the circle, you write down anything that could happen that you have control over and what you would do about it. And then he's like, outside the circle, you can write down all of the fears of things that you have no control over. And like, what would you do if they happen? And actually what happened was the inside circle ended up filling up so much more than the outside circle. The outside circle is things like hurricanes and, you know, like
Asteroids striking the
life
earth.
stuff that you really can't do anything about. And then on the inside circle was like, well, what can we do? So we can't do anything about that, but what can we do? What action, like what power do I have in this situation? Like nobody buys, what would you do? You know, or everyone hates you and they all refund, what would you do? You know, and I actually found that I was like, okay, I could go get a job. I could go, you know, negotiate with the bank. I could go do this. And actually the more actions that were in that circle, the more power I realized that I had in the situations, and it helped the fear calm down. And then, I mean, because all of us know that most of our fears are irrational. I think, you know, we can go down the rabbit hole a bit at 3 a.m., but then most of us, I think, know, okay, this is a bit much, but it can still paralyze us. So I think anything that can help you get some power back to move forward really helps. Any evidence, like I'm big on evidence building. Like you were saying, Jen, like, well, Niamh, you're challenged. How you say that every time and it doesn't happen. And then I go, okay, well, let's go with the evidence.
The odds are, right, the odds are it will be okay.
Odds are it will be okay. And if not, you've got all of these things you can do in your power circle. And then I find it possible to move forward. And then each time you move forward through fear, you gain a little bit more power. And then the next time some fear comes up, it's easier to do it. Like I know, you know, I'll be reopening my Light It Up program. I'll be doing a bit of a promo on that. I'll probably have a bunch of people hop in and I'll probably freak out and go, oh my God, they're all going to hate me. And so it's like, if I know that that's going to come up, then I can go, oh, there's that Niamh reaction. Okay, let's just feel this fear and live with it, and then it'll pass in a day or two. And knowing that it'll pass in a day or two really helps too.
Yeah. You know, and so the other day I was having a really bad day and did the opposite, where I was gathering evidence of everything I'd failed at in my life, which is not a fun kind of evidence exercise. But towards the end of it, I did have to think of times when like the worst case scenario has happened. Like, I'll be honest, when my daughter was diagnosed first with autism and then a white blood cell disorder, these things were so beyond the realm of what I was expecting as a parent to happen early on with my child. And then looking at like, okay, there are times when the worst case does happen and we still lived through it and figured it out, and we basically have a happy life, you know? I mean, like that was at the end of my, like, I haven't published a novel yet. I haven't done this. I failed as a parent at this, you know, I still haven't launched anything. Like looking at all, you know, I didn't sell the ranch at the right time. I should have done it when the prices were higher, you know, all these different things, that none of those are actually worst case. I have had moments of worst case and I still lived through it.
Yeah.
That felt good. To be like, it won't kill me. I'm not going to die. I mean, someday I will die, but not because of this thing.
That's really, really good. Yeah. That's really
But it's much more fun to collect good evidence, I think, than to collect all bad evidence. I was crying while I did it. I was really having a downer day that day.
I know. And I think it's partially like, it's identifying those moments and like catching yourself and going, oh, wow, I've really like derailed myself over here.
And then I got on Zoom with Niamh and told her about it. All the things I've done a horrible job at, but there are plenty of things we do good jobs at too. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And I think then as well, sometimes like experiencing it and letting it sort of like come upon you like that actually helps move through it more than like just stuffing it down and being like, nope, I will not be afraid, and I'll just go plow forward anyway. But just like letting it up and out. And actually, that's what we do often.
Yeah.
Oh, whoops, this call was a bit of a purge call. Okay.
Yeah. And actually something I've noticed, not to like totally derail us with our fear thing, but since going off my antidepressants in April, I cry again, which I'd kind of forgotten. After being on them for several years, I have not been a crier, but I was like, oh yeah, I used to be someone who cried at like sad points in movies, even like the Lego movie when he jumps out the window and she's like, no, I cried, you know. So now that I'm back to that, it does feel cathartic sometimes to take that rabbit hole a bit, cry it out, and then wipe yourself off, go clean your face. It does feel better sometimes just to get it out.
Yeah, to feel real emotions. I think like actually feeling the emotions sometimes feels good. Like it can be good to experience some emotions in a safe way where it's not gonna like totally derail you. You know, like if you get to that point where you're like, okay, I need help, then reach out for help. But you might be able to say, okay, like, let's just experience this for a bit. Let it come over. Let cry. I often find too that I will either watch comedy or I'll watch like serious heavy drama. So I'll either want to like cry it out or I'll want to like laugh to like lighten it up. And I use a lot of like, what am I putting in to help like change whatever's going on up there. So
yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I had a rough reading week. I finished Hunger by Roxane Gay. So I think that was part of my bit of a weepy week and feeling lots of feels and getting it out. That was good. I just noticed how long we've been on this episode, though. This is probably our longest ever episode, and it's fear. I wonder if people are going to stick with us. Yeah. If you stuck with us this long, thank you for sticking it out. We would love to hear what scares you in your life and business, and what do you do about it? How do you get past those things? What techniques do you have? And do you like any of ours? I don't know.
And thank you for hanging out with us. It felt really good to like publicly talk about some of these fears with the people who we are going to be showing this to.
Yeah, I'm really curious who that's going to be. One more thing that even I talked about the other day, we were talking about titling our episodes. Because at first we just had one word. We were just doing like, today we're talking about fear or planning or whatever. And I was like, let's make it more playful and use alliteration. And I was saying like, well, if you didn't know the people who are talking about this, but you just saw the word planning, like, would you click it? And Niamh was like, I thought we were just going to talk to the people who we already know. Won't this just be Jen and Niamh fans listening to us? And I was like, maybe, but hopefully we'll be reaching new people too. So
well, we want to reach new people. Like, oh.
So we'll see. Let us know. Are you new to us? I am really curious who's listening out there. So if you are listening on iTunes, please subscribe, rate, and review.
And if you're on YouTube watching us, hi, and go ahead and subscribe to our YouTube and leave us a comment and let us know, how you experience fear and what you got out of this episode. And if you're new to us, we'd love to know that. So thanks, guys, for coming on and listening to us. This felt great.
Yeah, I feel much better too.
Bye.